Hey everyone, Nick Engvall here. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about some of the people that make the sneaker history community and this podcast possible. It's more important than ever to think about who you give your money to when you're buying clothing to go with your kicks. Our friends at Guilty Goods started their brand with a goal of giving back, especially to the communities that make sneaker culture possible. With every purchase from Guilty Goods, at least 10% of the proceeds are donated to organizations like Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the Susan G. Komen Foundation, the Movement for Black Lives, and many more. You can save 30% on your order by using the code HISTORY at guiltygoods.us. Again, that's history at guiltygoods.us for 30% off, and you can feel good about your purchase knowing you're supporting a meaningful cause. Sneakers are all about presentation, and if you're like me, displaying your kicks at home or in the office is just as important as when they're on your feet. Sneaker Throne makes sneaker display cases featuring customizable LED lights, drop side cases to showcase the entire side of the shoe, not just the heel or the toe, the whole shoe. They've also got display cases for trading card collectors and hat collectors. To me, it's the perfect way to display your collection. You can save at least 10% on your Sneaker Throne order by using the code HISTORY at sneakerthrone.com. That's history at sneakerthrone.com. If you're a Patreon supporter or a member of our Discord community, you already know about Kicks with V hot sauce and his small batch, locally sourced hot sauce. V has been one of the biggest supporters of sneaker history and the podcast since the early days. He's currently the defending champion in our community trivia nights competition. Kicks with V hot sauce has been a huge hit with the community. You can save 10% on your order by using the code SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. That's SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. Now, you're probably here because you like sneakers, and if you join the Discord, you know our community is about so much more than that. Whether it's the marathon-like community calls, trivia night debates, the in-person meetups, or just sharing our favorite experiences, we found that although we have such different backgrounds, we all have some unexpected shared passions. Not only does the entire community look out for each other when it comes to releases, we're like a support group for life in general. You can join the Discord community for free by heading to the show notes of this episode. After you're done listening to this episode, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to have someone show their appreciation. Now let's get into today's episode.
Jordan trying to shake off Starks. Oh, what a move by Jordan! LeBron James with no regard for human life. Final seconds. Bryant for the win. Iverson against Gill. The crowd on its feet. Allen for the win.
Welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Sneaker History. And there's this phrase that George Clooney kind of coined, which is one for us, one for them. This is one for me specifically, because I really am a big fan of this next guy that we're going to introduce. You may know him as the 2018 Outback Bowl Blooming Onion, one of 4 co-hosts of the only college football podcast that exists today. He's not a celebrity hot tub, he's the celebrity hot tub. Ryan Nanni, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you. That's such a powerful intro. I feel like I have a lot to live up to here, but thank you for setting the stage for me here.
Of course. And before we go ahead and get started, Ryan had this bold proclamation. Dare I say, is it a New Year's resolution this year?
It predated New Year's slightly, but yeah, let's go with that.
Okay,
that works.
So we'll go with that. And simply put, the aforementioned celebrity hot tub, Ryan Nanni, wants to get on as many podcasts as he possibly can. And lo and behold, I have a podcast. And because Ryan has brought me much joy over the last decade plus, I figured he can get my listeners and our listeners at the sneaker history community at least a 30-minute quick shot in the arm of just happiness, weirdness, and everything in between.
Well, thank you for having me. You know, if for those of your listeners who have no idea what the Shutdown Fullcast is and are like, who is this joker? I look forward to seeing how they feel at the end of this interview.
I mean, that wasn't on the agenda, but I mean, it's very hard to quantify what the Shutdown Fullcast is. I think the best way, the closest analogy I could do is if you have a cat, try to explain to that cat what the internet is. And I think you get half of what the Shutdown Fullcast is.
Okay, yeah, I think that's better than I can explain it. So
okay, we'll go ahead and take that. So Ryan is going to be a good sport today, but because this is a sneaker history podcast and we need to make sure that there is some canon that's still being met, I introduced Ryan to probably our most reoccurring segment, which is Rocking and Copping. And as if this is your first sneaker history, by the way, rocking is a shoe or something that you're currently wearing, and copping is something that you are looking to purchase in the future. Usually we put it towards shoes, but because we've got such a distinguished guest today, we can open it up to anything you choose. So Ryan, what are you rocking and what are you copping?
All right, well, let's stick with shoes, because as setting this whole thing up, I explained that I have specifically one messed up foot. It's not like anything horrible. It's just I have foot pain that requires a custom orthotic. And as a result, I really only rock one consistent brand and style of shoe, and that is the Asics GT 1000.
Okay.
Every year it's time to get the new pair. They come in like a decent selection of colorways, so I can sort of like mix it up a little bit. But I also know like this is a dad running shoe. I would argue there are more dad running shoes than this. And I will also say this. When you hurt your foot and you look up like, okay, what sneakers should I buy to help stabilize? In my case, it was a stress fracture that has sort of just never fully healed properly. It's not a big deal. But when you look this up on the internet, it's like, hey, what should I buy? The number one thing you will see is the Nike Air Monarch. The absolute like bottom feeder of, even I know, like you can't go that route. Or if you do, you are saying I am at a certain place in my life and I'm not going back to a cooler one. So I don't own Air Monarchs, but they are the recommended shoe for people who are washed and have bad feet, as it turns out.
So it's funny you mention that, because two things. One, I'm a Nike employee, and whatever you think of the Monarch, it's amplified within the confines of the campus. And then secondly, when the news was spreading within the community that, oh yeah, my wife's expecting our first kid, I believe there was a impromptu Kickstarter fund that was operated to buy me a pair of Monarchs. And it was one of those things where I just hope that it's a reoccurring tradition, because I think that is probably the greatest induction ceremony a dad could possibly have.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where I got my pair of Monarchs. I've been wearing them out and about, and I've had friends of mine who are very stylish people. They're Nike designers. They're on that cutting edge, and they are looking at me like I'm Andy Kaufman and I'm doing some sort of performance comedy piece. And I'm just here to tell them, no, it's comfortable. It's comfortable as all get out. I'm not trying to be any sort of intentional troll. It's just at this point, I don't have time for it. But I will say this. I don't know if you know about the new Nike Go Flyies. And this
I've seen them. I've seen them on the internet, not in person.
No. So this right here, saves me so much time in the morning when I'm chasing after the kids. So if we can get some sort of Super Saiyan merger between the Nike Go Flyies and the Air Monarch, I'm here for it. But
that's the dream.
That's the dream.
So, okay. As far as copping, I decided I didn't give you any warning about this, but I'm going to flip this at you.
Yeah.
If you are like me, somebody who is not into sneaker culture, but knows people who are, is sort of like casually interested in it, and is like, what's a good starting point? Imagine that like I am a rube walking into a restaurant being like, what is a nice but accessible bottle of wine that I should order? Like, what's a good starting point for somebody like me?
From a sneaker perspective, I know the Jordan 1s are just kind of ubiquitous, as are the Panda Dunks. And I'll go in that genre, and it may be a little bit pricey, but because you made the comparison to a bottle of fine wine, I'm assuming the person can afford it. I think any pair of Jordan 3s, because this is literally an exercise I just went with my brother-in-law, because he came and visited us over the holidays. And he's actually a fellow Gator, like yourself, if I did my research correctly. So
you did.
He was telling me that, you know, all the kids have Jordan 1s, and I kind of want to go to Jordan, but I don't want to do that. And I was like, come here, my son, take the Jordan 3, because you're going to be at Indian dance practice, and there's going to be a lovely young lady that's going to catch your eye. And you don't want to be a sea of 1s. You want to be 3, because you're 3 times that guy. So that's my answer usually.
Okay.
The Jordan 3.
I'm going to pursue this. I don't know if I'll let you know if and when I pull the trigger, but I need a direction here. I need a starting point, and the Jordan 3s seem like a good one.
And I was going to say, you have some pretty famous friends that are also sneakerheads. So, I mean, Mike Golick Jr., I think he would be another one to kind of consult and use as your sneaker game.
Pick his brain.
What would you think? And I think if you bring him the Jordan 3, it may perk his ears a little bit in a good way.
Okay.
Because I think everybody's like, yeah, I got to get a pair of Yeezys. I got to get a pair of Jordan 1s. No, get Jordan 3s and just be a distinguished gentleman.
Okay, good. I love it.
So I'll use this as a segue to talk to you about the fact that despite having and I almost think about it, this would be probably the greatest serial killer calling card of all time. It's just like one insole left at every, like, what is your personal sneaker history growing up? Like, did you have a pair and you may not even know the style, but just something about sneakers that in a particular moment in your time, they're like, yes, I'm all in on this.
So I think I was definitely growing up in the house that was like, we're not doing any of that. Like this will betray my age a little bit, but I remember when the Reebok pump was a thing. Like, and so much I think of why that was a big deal, at least to me, was that it was Shaq's shoe. And Shaq was so cool. Like, Shaq is still very cool, but I don't think people who maybe come to him now or remember like him from like, let's say his Heat days on, understand that like young Orlando Magic Shaq was unlike anything you'd ever seen. Just like super ripped, super tall, was in college, was constantly shattering backboards. Like it was this massive sea change in like what you thought a basketball player could be. So his shoe was something to aspire to. My parents were like, absolutely not. We're not spending. So we were somewhere in between what is the cheapest shoe in the store and what is like the acceptable Reebok or Nike that like we can find on sale. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't anything that was sort of like, oh, this is a pivotal. There were things like the pump that was like aspirational, but I never got to live that lifestyle. I will tell you that the shoe that got me in the foot trouble that I live with today was also an Asics shoe. It was the I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the Onitsuka Tiger.
Oh,
I forget which one exactly.
I think you nailed the pronunciation. In fact, I go out of my way not to pronounce it. I'm just either go Bruce Lee shoe or the Tiger shoe.
Yes, or the Kill Bill shoe is the other
exactly.
one.
Thank you.
Yes. That was sort of like me sort of saying like, okay, I like how these look. At the time I was living in New York and I was like, this is comfortable. And the short version is I walked around in those shoes too much. And finally a doctor was like, yeah, man, you can't, these are not shoes you can put like 3 miles a day. That's not what these are for. What did you do? So I was stupid. But yeah, I mean, I think like some part of me is always going to be like, man, if only I had gotten pumps, I would have been as cool as Shaq, which is not even close to true.
I think you're pretty cool on your own. I have my own kind of story with the pumps. So when we first moved to the States, like same concept. Like my folks love Nike, love Reebok. It's just like we're not at that tax bracket, so to speak. So when we got our citizenship, I just remember my dad distinctly taking my brother and I to the local Foot Locker, and they had like a buy two get one free on I think about 25 or 30 styles. And the weirdest caveat my dad has ever given me is like, you can have any two, but one of the 3 pairs has to be the Reebok pump. And it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I mean, sure. And then the novelty factor of just like pumping yourself up before like mundane high school shit. Like, oh, I'm going to take the Spanish quiz. Let me go ahead and get 5 pumps because 5 questions. Or, oh, there's a nice young lady. Let me pump up and see if that can get me a date with her. But the thing that was crazy was the pump on the right shoe like died within 3 days. This is why these are on sale. So the pump shoe, it's one of those things that's so hard to explain unless you're there in the moment. And much like Shaq and his athletic brilliance and the Orlando Magic thing, it's like kids may have that comparison of Zion now, but I think you got to give Zion an additional foot and give him 200 pounds and he still moves with the same mobility and leaps with the same athleticism. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things where the pump is no joke. A lot of people have talked to me about the fact that I kind of like the pump. Is that okay? I was like, yeah, it's okay. Like I think half the fun of the sneaker community is just like, you like what you like. It's just people are going to rock with you anyway. So
the only other one I can remember is more in like probably like middle school, early high school. There was a time where K-Swiss white shells were like a thing, at least I grew up in Florida, and for a while, like that was a thing. And I think that was probably my first exposure to the idea that it wasn't just about having a certain shoe. It was about keeping the shoe looking nice. Yes. Like that's a very weird thing, I think, to transition to when you go from being a kid to getting older, is the idea that like your shoes should look clean. Especially like, I mean, growing up in Florida, you're like playing outside all the time. It's super like sweaty and muddy and dirty and all these things. And the idea of like, oh, I'm like, these are supposed to look as nice as the day that I bought them was a very interesting sort of shift. I remember that very clearly because like you could tell when somebody had not taken care of their K-Swiss.
Listen, I mean, the Swiss are a very immaculate people. They're very organized and methodical, and I think you would be besmirching Roger Federer and Fabio Cesaro and any other famous Swissmen and Swiss women. It's funny you mention that because growing up, the other unspoken rule was I could never get white sneakers for that reason because I would just beat them up to hell. And it was being an adult, realizing that, we have friends in the industry or sponsors that are sneaker cleaners. So then now I get into it. And now it's gotten to the point now where I will clean my daughter's sneakers sometimes right before daycare because I'm like, I can't have you go down the path that I went down because there's much shame that I've brought onto all of our ancestors. And you can be the one that breaks the cycle.
How important, first of all, how old is your daughter?
15 months.
Okay. So if I had to guess, I have a 13-month-old, walking or close to it.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the sneaker strategy for you for her? Like what are we doing on your end there?
It's the same. I'm so happy that there is a kid's version of the Fly Goees because it's so easy to pop in and out. Yeah. And I think if I wasn't fortunate enough to work at Nike, it would just be all the Velcros because even her papa struggled to tie shoelaces until he was 25. I'm amongst a friend now. I feel I can share that in public, but it's always just in and out in terms of getting in and out of the shoe. And hopefully it's somewhat comfortable and know your limitations. So to your point about the Tiger shoe, we're not trying to run any 5Ks every day.
Yes, right.
So I think that's our sneaker strategy. But I mean, like, what about you? Has there been a similar kind of concept to you? Like, okay, should I invest a lot? Because that was the biggest fight my wife and I had about this particular topic. It was like, I want the kid to be suited and booted. But then I also realized that it's kind of weird when your kid's 14 and you're like, I still have your Air Force Ones from when you were a child.
Right.
So I think,
So I also have a 6-year-old. And with her, it was very much like, whatever you will wear. It could not care less. Like we bought it at Target for $7. It doesn't matter at all. But at some point, when she turned 4 or 5, we had some hand-me-downs. They're Nikes. I forget exactly what style they are. That we inherited from somebody who was like, my kid never wore these. She just didn't like them, didn't want them. So they were fresh and clean. Right. And she was like, wow, these are great. And so we are sort of like diving into, okay, this is like they're not the only thing you're going to wear. Like you're definitely going to have your shoes that we're going to get beat up. You know, we're going to the park and we know you're going to end up in the creek or something. So like, that's what we're wearing. But now we are with her because she sort of is starting to develop her own sense of style and wants to have that independence. Like it's nice to filter those things in. It's also great because I'll tell you this. If you have like relatives who are like, I don't know what to get your kid for their birthday or this holiday or whatever, if you can point them towards some slightly nicer sneakers that because they're kid sneakers, like broadly speaking, you're not going to be like, hey, I need you to drop $380 on these or something.
Knock on wood.
Yeah. I mean, that is that is a really good sweet spot because now you can be like, oh, these are the sneakers that your grandmother gave you, and so you got to take good care of them. And they got to look good.
That's brilliant. No, and it's funny you mentioned that because we went through a similar experience just the other day at her daycare. So she goes to a Spanish immersion school, and my Spanish is in the Peggy Hill realm of things. So I had those Fly Goees, and they're like a nice green and pink and red swoosh. So I take them, and my extra Carolina is just like, it's no necessary. I was like, no, she needs shoes. It's cold outside. She goes, no,
right.
These are too nice. We have her outdoor shoes. You take these back now because I don't want to see them here. So it's one of those things where, like, I appreciate you, Maestra Carolina. You're looking out for me, and
that's right. That's right. Like understanding time and place.
Yeah,
this is not the time or the place.
It truly takes a village to raise a dad. Because she just looked at me like I had 4 heads coming out of various parts of my body. Like, no, these are indoor shoes. These are not outdoor shoes.
It's as if you brought a child to school in a tuxedo.
Yeah. I have high aspirations for my future state senator daughter, and like, no, come on, it's state senator. It's not U.S. senator. Oh no! I mean, that's one of the other things where, much to learn. So I appreciate you kind of indulging me because I know that was also on the agenda. So I will kind of utilize this as a two-way segue. So we've got a Super Bowl coming up, and I wanted you to touch on some of your other favorite athletes and favorite teams. I know you're a big Gator fan and a Philadelphia Eagles fan, but is there any other club or player that you kind of want to shine a spotlight on before we go ahead and just talk about the inevitable?
I think like the AFC Championship was both perfect and terrible for me because I was sort of like, I was fine with either outcome.
Right.
Truly. Like, I think both Kansas City and Cincinnati are really fun teams with really not just good quarterbacks, but like quarterbacks who make the game more exciting in a variety of ways. Yep. They're fun to root for. They have distinctive skills. Patrick Mahomes is like, to say he has distinctive skills is maybe the like least compliment you could pay him. But Joe Burrow, I think Joe Burrow, is capable of doing that thing where you're like, oh, he made that throw. I like their coaching staffs. I like that these are both teams that are, that I'm not sick of. Obviously Kansas City's been in the Super Bowl multiple times. Cincinnati was just there, but I'm not over it. I'm not like, okay.
It's not the Patriots essentially, but where it's just a turn of the season is like, here's the Patriots in the Super Bowl again. I'm not a Jaguars fan, but I am a fan of Jaguars fans, if that makes sense. Like, I think the way that diehard Duval people ride for their city and their team is awesome because it is like this year it's worked out nicely. Most years it is a thankless task. It is a miserable task. And like they have a level of commitment that is both admirable and terrifying. And beyond that, like growing up, I was a Bucks fan. I got away from that because it just like stopped being interesting. I've like dabbled with a few baseball teams here and there. I will say this I think the inevitable consequence of working in sports media for a while is you end up becoming a generalist because it's just more interesting. Because if you are like, yes, I am a Florida fan. It has not been a super interesting at this point decade to be a Florida fan. So it is more interesting to sort of have the, I guess, internal permission to sort of say like, okay, I think Pitt is really interesting this year, or I think Oregon State is super interesting this year, and sort of like treat it like a buffet where you're sort of like, I know the food that I like best, but I don't have to just eat that. I can sort of like mix it up. Every plate can be different. And that's I think the fun of it for me. No, I'm not in the sports media like you, aspirationally, maybe one day, but I also kind of prefer my sports that way because for every Kansas City Chief fandom that I have, and to your point, like up until even this Alex Smith era, it was a big plate of mediocrity. I mean, we had a couple of shining moments here or there, but Smith kind of righted us into a consistency that Mahomes only built in. Like, for every Kansas City Chief, I always tell people I need to have my Missouri Tigers, where it's just like, it can always be worse. And how passionate I am about the Kansas City Chiefs, I get that sports fandom is a wholly unique experience, but if you're truly ride or die for a Missouri Tigers football season, and I grew up with a lot of these guys, I just am like, this is kind of why I moved. I like the team. But, like, really? Gary Pinkel?
Yeah. I mean, it's what every team need. And there are teams that sort of like don't have this. I live in Nashville, and like Vanderbilt really doesn't have, I'm not going to say they don't have fans, but they don't have the community buy-in that a Missouri does in Columbia. Yeah. Like, it's just not there to the point where, like, if Vandy is hosting Georgia, 70% of the stadium is going to be Georgia fans who decided, like, oh, I'm going to turn this into a trip to Nashville. And so I think even when your team is like, why are you doing this? What is happening? The alternative is so kind of unpleasant and difficult that I weirdly appreciate that there are people who will carry the torch for the teams where it doesn't make sense to carry one.
That's fair. And I think that's a very nice way of looking at it. But, like, I have a bunch of LA Clippers fans in my life, and I think that's where my mind naturally gravitated towards, where it's just like, you know what? They do deserve diehard fans like you. So thank you for walking me down on that. You mentioned this concept of kind of like jarring sports fan bases. I think growing up in Missouri when we were in the Big 12 and embracing our Midwestern roots, and then when I graduated and I left Missouri to move out to the West Coast, and then we joined the SEC. And now every time I go home, I'm like, why is everybody speaking with a Southern accent? So that's been a really jarring juxtaposition, because like earlier, like we had a very neutral Bob Costas type of accent. And the analogy I always make is similar to how Texas and California and Florida are the breeding grounds for a lot of quality football players. As much as I hate giving Mizzou journalism this, it's like there's a reason why a lot of good journalists come out of the University of Missouri, even though they're very pompous and up their own ass. But
isn't that true of all the journal? Like, there's no journalism school where you're like, oh, they're really good, and also they're super humble. Like, that just doesn't exist.
That's fair. I guess I haven't run into that many Northwestern fans in my life. So it's just I've grown up with them, and I'm like, I get that you failed your grammar test freshman year, and like that got you where you needed to be. So you won this Pulitzer in nuclear engineering. But my dude, I've heard this 12 times. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit different. I need more Northwestern fans in my life, so then I can compare and contrast the journalism struggles that have fled.
That's a thing nobody's ever said. It's rare that you have the chance to say something that nobody in human history has ever said. I think you just did it.
Like, and this is why, if I'm going to give you guys a shameless plug, this is why we listen to the Shutdown Fullcast, because at least 3 times an episode, some comparison, some comment is made, and it's almost done in an offhanded remark. And then, like a Zapruder film or like the Criterion Collection, you have to pause it, you have to write it down, and then you just have to sit at it and look at it and be like, this is genius. So if I can get you one moment like that, it's the least I can do, because you've given me so many moments like that. So thank you for that.
That's very nice to hear. Thank you.
Of course. I will use this to segue into the big game. So Philadelphia Eagles fan. I didn't know you were a Philadelphia Eagles fan. How did that come about?
Okay, so when people out in the world ask me this, I have like my set response, which is a lie, but I'll tell the lie here briefly, which is that my godfather is from Philadelphia, and he's very important to me, and therefore I sort of like have attached to the Eagles, blah, blah, blah. None of that is true. I mean, like, yes, my godfather is from Philadelphia, and he is important to me. It has nothing to do with why I'm an Eagles fan. The short version is I sort of memed myself into it. I gravitated towards the Eagles, specifically the Doug Peterson Eagles, because I really enjoyed the chaos energy that they had. Like, the fact that it remains amazing that Tom Brady has lost Super Bowls before, and he's lost them to Eli Manning. Mm-hmm. But to lose to Nick Foles in a Super Bowl is still one of the craziest things that's ever happened, and is just like such a good little fact. You combine that with like Philly and Philly Twitter's penchant for true weirdness. The simplest distillation of this is like, Hitchbot, the idea that somebody was like, we're going to build a robot that will sort of like tour the country. And once it got to Philadelphia, they basically like beat it to death, and that was it. There's a weird sort of chaos energy is the only way I can think of to describe it to Philly and the Eagles that I really like, and that I think is a lot of fun. And so much of it is that, you know, most fan bases are very much like, hey, we can talk shit about our team, but you can't. And Philly fans, I think, are more like, hey, you can't talk shit about our team because we're better at it. Like, you're missing when you do it, you're missing several layers and several points. Like, there is a reason why Allen Iverson thrived so well, because he had that same sort of like forever chip on his shoulder, forever like, fuck you, I'm going to do it myself. Like, he is sort of a really good embodiment of it. But I sort of did this as a bit for long enough that now I like follow the team and care about them, and was like, I was going to be really pissed if they lost to the Giants in the divisional round, because I'm like, you beat the Giants twice. That shouldn't happen.
Right.
So I'm not going to say like I am a full on dyed in the wool Eagles fan. I'm way down on the list, but they are a team I care about at this point.
No, that's awesome. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I remember distinctly sitting in a bar. I think it might have been Andy Reid's first or second year as the Chiefs coach. And I'm just kind of watching, and it's a playoff collapse. And I don't know if it was the Tennessee one or the Indianapolis one. And I just hear cackling at every questionable decision. And so it's like, first time, like, okay, it's funny. Second time, I'm just like, who is doing this? Third time, I figure it out. So I look, and that dude is literally telling me with his eyes, please say something to me. Because he's got his Eagles hat on. He goes, I want to fight you.
Right.
Fight you because of how much joy I'm taking in Andy Reid being Andy Reid. And you're not used to this. And you can't say shit to me, like you said. So it was one of those things where I was just like, let me get that man a bottle of the finest ice water this establishment has. I'm going to try to make friends with you, because lo and behold, Andy Reid has been a constant in my life. And it's one of those things where I love your chaos energy, because the one thing I always admire about a fan base that I'm not a part of is how chaotic they are and how angry they are.
Yeah.
And if there's two words that describe Philly, it's chaotic and angry. And it's one of those things where I remember telling my wife, like, hey, let's watch Abbott Elementary, because I would assume that there's going to be an amount of chaos and hostility. And with the exception of maybe one character, it's very generic. And I'm like, this is why I should have just given you It's Sunny in Philadelphia, because that truly is, like, Philly's having a golden era of content between Allen Iverson and Sunny, because that truly is the Philly experience.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
So how are you feeling about the game itself? Like I think every time I look, the line changes 1.5. So is there a couple of barometers that, you know, watching the Phillies now for the last couple of years, we're like, okay, this is a good game for us because XYZ has happened?
It's weird, because when you step back and you look at this Eagles team from the perspective of the start of the year, it feels like at this point, it is entirely house money. This is not a team that was picked to win the division, was maybe picked to like sneak into the playoffs or something. It was not a team that was like, oh, they're going to like rip off 12 straight wins to start the year. They're going to lock up the number, you know, everything they've accomplished, and more specifically what Jalen Hurts has accomplished, is far beyond what the expectations were, reasonable or otherwise. And I'm trying to sort of maintain, this is the least Philly thing I think I could say, that level of perspective, that there is not a scenario where this is a failure of a year for the Eagles, in part because like they have some exciting young pieces. They are not a team like the Saints or the Vikings, where it's like you're in cap hell and you've lost all your draft picks, and what do you like, if it didn't work now, you're totally screwed. That said, I think the Eagles are a hard team to put a pin in right now, because the last, let's say, month has been not a lot of useful data.
Right.
Playing without Jalen Hurts towards the end of the year didn't really tell us a ton about what this team is going to look like in the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts sort of playing his way back from injury did not tell us a lot. And then obviously the NFC Championship. It's like the way that played out with the 49ers on offense basically like having a disconnected controller through no fault of their own. It makes it really hard to sort of come to any conclusions. The other part of this that makes this really hard, frankly, is the Kansas City side, which is that like it's very hard to make any hard and fast predictions about the team with Patrick Mahomes, because you look at what just happened in the AFC Championship, and obviously so much of the focus there was about his health, his ankle, what he would or would not be able to do. And I think, like, with some small exceptions, largely outpaced expectations there. But to me, the interesting thing is less what he did with his own physical limitations and more the cast of characters. Like, the fact that they were able to close that game out with like special teamers and practice squad guys coming up with big catches and not sort of have to say like, okay, here's wide receivers 1 through 3. That's wild. And that is, I think, the thing that makes him and this Chiefs team so unpredictable. And I don't know what to do. I mean, you tell me, what do you do with that?
No, I really can't do much with it except just enjoy the ride. Because to your point, it's like when you have this and you have been force-fed the Elvis Gerbacks, the Steve Bonos of the world, and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do with this. And then you go to the opposite end of the spectrum and you're having like filet mignon every night. I just remember one game where he missed a simple throw and I just got unreasonably angry. And then I had to literally remove myself from the game and be like, this dude is going to bring you so much happiness in the next 15 years. Oh, knock on wood. Do not get upset because he missed a 5-yard out, because then you kind of turn into a broad caricature of a New England Patriot fan or like a Northeastern fan in the sense that, oh, everything is atrocious, my team is trash. No, they're not. So for me, it's one of those things where I think you guys have the much better roster. I think if we look at it positionally, I would always give the check marks to the Eagles. The one thing I think keeps us somewhat in the game is 15. And it's one of those things where even, I know this is kind of a weird Super Bowl in the grand scheme of things. He got blown out by that Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, but I still stand by that. It was one of the more impressive performances I ever saw a quarterback have, even though he lost and statistically he was atrocious. He was still trying things. He was still becoming the wizard that we all have kind of expected him to be. And if he pulled off some of those, like he still would have lost the game, but that would have been one of the greatest throws ever, or that would have been one of the most unreal performances. So that's where I have to just kind of make sure that I have to keep myself honest. As like a telltale sign of my team, like, okay, if I know X happens, something good is going to happen in terms of a win or a loss. Anytime he throws the ball to Travis Kelce, and Travis Kelce like slowly tugboats his direction and then like button hooks and curls it upfield, and I'm like, that is the slowest man in the history of Earth. But then nobody tackles him and he gets 5 to 15 yards more than anticipated, then I feel like that's comforting, because we have this narrative in football where your tight end is supposed to be your safety blanket. And in that regard, he's my safety blanket as a fan now, because I'm like, if he can take a 5-yard play and make it a 20-yard play, something's going right with that team. So I'm going to be interested to see that. Now, that being said, if Philly wins, the only request I have, and I'm sure you're going to talk to Eagles Brass about this, is can we get round 2 of Jason Kelce's post-game Super Bowl parade mummers?
His mummers look. I mean, hopefully he'll just bring it and come out for the trophy ceremony. Frankly,
I mean, at this point, like, I don't want to mess with greatness, because to your point, like, we have to make this resolution ourselves as sports fans. Like, we just have to embrace greatness. We don't have to embrace debate. Sorry, ESPN, but like that is pitch perfect. Like the anger, the hostility, like. He's drunk.
The ridiculousness that he's doing all this in effectively a Wizard of Oz costume.
Yes, it's the ultimate lollipop game. And not only that, the sheer length of that list. Like, I don't know if you're a wrestling fan. It just reminds me of the Chris Jericho list of 1,004 holds, where he's like, Dennis Wisniewski, Lane Johnson, assistant GM, the head trainer. Just everybody had a personal mountain to climb that year. And Jason Kelce was there to commemorate it. And you know, it's the most Philly shit ever that we went through it. Yeah.
It's I mostly think it will be a very entertaining Super Bowl, because you can sort of see the angle. You can sort of talk yourself into whatever direction you want to. You can say like, okay, the Phillies linebackers are not great in coverage, and that's a thing that Kelsey and maybe the running backs getting loose, like you can see how that gets exploited. You can say Kansas City secondary is super young and super green, and that's where if Jalen Hurts' shoulder is healthy, like they will just bomb them away. Like they'll just do that. You can sort of like push this in several permutations, and I think what will be interesting is that this doesn't feel like this will be a Super Bowl where it starts one way and it stays that way. Like the best example of that is probably the Pats-Rams Super Bowl, the more recent one, right. Not the Brady's first Super Bowl title, where it's sort of like, oh, okay, schematically, New England came into that game and was like, this is what we're going to do to shut down St. Louis offense. LA, couldn't adjust as a result. I think this is going to have more of an ebb and flow, a lot like the AFC Championship game, probably, where you're sort of like, just because one team gets out to a lead, even a double-digit lead, it probably doesn't mean a lot.
Yep. I think I agree with that, because I think for me, the most fun football games are the ones that turn into a Jenga contest, a sword fight, where it's just like, okay, yes, we just took your best shot. Here's our best shot. And
right.
I know it's a popular thought of like, oh, it's going to come down to who has the ball last. Yeah, that's kind of fun for us. That's, I think, what we're all secretly rooting for if our teams are not involved. But schematically, I'm trying to learn more about the game myself. But I think non-skill position matchup, I would love to see who gets better of that Jason Kelsey, Chris Jones matchup, because I think they're both at the top of their game. And I wish I knew a little bit more about line play to really articulate why one person has a strength in certain situations. But I think that's going to be the really fun game to watch. And it's funny you mentioned Allen Iverson previously because of how much he embodied that Philly ethos. Jalen Hurts to me, initially, not that guy. Just very smooth, very just kind, lack of a better term. But then to what you kind of call out in terms of Philly always feels the need to prove themselves and project why they were there. Like, I became a fan of Jalen Hurts just because of how he was in Alabama. He never once kind of raised a kerfuffle about the fact that, okay, you know, I was a starter. He just goes about his business. And I think there is something inherently Philly about like internalizing it and then being very productive about it, but not being demonstrative. And then anybody that can get an entire Northeastern fan base to jump for joy that Anita Baker is going to be singing the national anthem. Like, that was my favorite Philly football Twitter subplot of the year, was just the amount of happiness that was associated with Anita Baker that I didn't think we would see past the 1970s as a decade.
Yes, that's an entirely reasonable point as well. Yeah. It remains to be seen like what Jalen Hurts will be for the next 5 years or whatever, but this year alone has just been it's been so nice for him, because going back to his college career, as you said, and even sort of like the way in which he came onto the Eagles, where like ownership and Carson Wentz and like the head coach, like they're all at each other's throats, and he's just sort of there in the background. It's nice that it sort of has paid off for him in a way where it's like, oh, okay, you've worked hard and you've developed skill, and that is paying off for you. And that's just awesome. It also feels like, in the same way that Eagles fans famously booed Donovan McNabb when he got drafted. And like, by all measure, Donovan McNabb was a great quarterback for Philly. I know he threw up in the Super Bowl. We all saw it.
We've all thrown up in a big moment in our life.
We've all thrown up in a big moment before. But there is something that like, somebody who has the Jalen Hurts storyline kind of fits better than somebody who gets drafted super high, super, well regarded and all that. This feels more right.
Ryan, you were talking about throwing up in a big moment, and my laptop decided to indulge you in that. So, what you were saying?
Yeah, I am terrible at making predictions, so I won't say what I think will happen in the Super Bowl. But I do think it will. I do think it will be the kind of thing that everybody walks away from feeling reasonably good about the effort that was put forward. I don't think I truly do not think it will be like one team. I don't think this is TCU Georgia. Let me just put it that way.
I don't think so either. And it's one of those things where Even if the Chiefs lose, I'm not too upset about it because of the fact that the Eagles win. You're an Eagles fan. I've got a couple other Eagles fans in my life, and I would like to see Jalen Hurts win. And I'll end on this one anecdote because I think somebody was interviewing the aforementioned Jason Kelce, and he was talking about the fact that, linemen often get gifts from their quarterbacks. So Carson Wentz got the entire O-line, I believe, shotguns.
That sounds right.
And, and Jalen Hurts, designer luggage. So on that note, we will allow you to pack this episode up, put it in your overhead compartment, and we will say goodbye. So Ryan, before we truly sign off for the night, where can people follow you in case they want to learn more about you or the Shutdown Fullcast or any other projects you're involved in?
You can find me at Celebrity Hot Tub on Twitter and Instagram. There's not that much interesting going on Instagram. Like occasionally I'm like, hey, here's a cake I made. Or if you want me to join your podcast, ryan.nanny@gmail.com. Like, This I know that this is quote unquote out of my comfort zone as not a major sneaker person, but like somebody who operates a banking podcast was like, I don't know, do you want to talk? So all topics, fair game. I'll be as stupid as I am here and other places, most notably the Shutdown Fullcast. But let me know. I'll come hop on a podcast, no problem.
Excellent. And you were not stupid. You were running circles around me at one point. So we are all good because your laptop actually decided to be perfectly functioning. Just this once. We'll take it though. You can find me on Twitter at Roheezy. You can find me on Instagram at RoadM13. Please follow the Sneaker History podcast. We also have our Formula One podcast, Exhaust Notes. We put the exhaust in Exhaust Notes because how silly we are. And it's one of those things that I got to talk to one of my podcasting idols in a sense because that full cast energy is what we try to convey on the Exhaust.
Well, thank you.
So I thank you for that, Ryan, and thank you again for the opportunity to interview you. And we look forward to seeing what you've got next.
Thanks, man.
Hey everyone, this is Nick again. Before you take off, do us a solid and head over to Apple Podcasts to leave us a review. Give us a rating on Spotify and Amazon Music, and make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel because we have even more video content coming soon. Speaking of new content, we have an amazing community of sneaker enthusiasts that hang out in our Sneaker History Discord on a daily basis. While sneakers is a connection point that brought us all together, we've all discovered countless shared passions that we have in common with each other. We recently launched a couple of new podcasts directly from our community. One of them is a Formula One podcast. If you're an F1 fan like me, the Exhaust Notes podcast is your weekly fix of Formula One fun. It's hosted by myself, Rohit Malhotra, and Todd Yates. New episodes drop every Tuesday. I've been wearing fitted hats for years and collecting my favorite teams since I was a little leaguer. It has been awesome to see so many new fans getting into fitteds in recent years. Crown and Stitch is our new talk show about fitted hats with Dexter, Keith, and myself, where we talk about fitted hats, snapbacks, throw in some obscure hats because we all kind of like some funky stuff once in a while, don't we? Copping, collecting, and so much more. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Hit the links in the show notes for this episode to give our new shows a listen, and be on the lookout for more new podcasts dropping soon. Last but not least, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to have someone show their appreciation. Thank you all for the support, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.